Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling an incredibly common yet absolutely fascinating misconception in the business world. It's really easy to look at a booming, busy company and just assume they must be rolling in cash. But assuming top-line revenue automatically equals bottom-line profit, that can be a surprisingly dangerous illusion. Let's uncover the harsh reality of high fixed-cost businesses. And to do it, we're going to compare two industries that honestly seem like they're worlds apart. All right, let's just dive right in. Picture a standard $30,000 delivery van. Now put that right next to a sprawling billion-dollar hospital system. I know, they seem like they belong in totally different universes, right? But under the hood, their economic engines share this surprising fundamental vulnerability that can easily bankrupt an operator who doesn't respect the math. Which brings us to Section 1, the illusion of simplicity. Think about it. On the surface, a courier's job looks ridiculously simple. You pick up a cardboard box from point A, drop it at point B, collect your fee, and pocket the difference. A hospital? A patient walks into a building, gets healed, pays a huge bill, and the hospital profits. It sounds almost insultingly simple. A transaction so basic humans have been doing versions of it forever. But that's exactly the trap. Because you aren't actually selling driving, and you aren't actually selling medicine. You are selling a highly structured service. For couriers, the true product is actually reliability, that absolute ironclad guarantee that a box arrives on time, undamaged every single time. Hospitals, they sell readiness, 24/7 access to care, meaning the lights, the multi-million-dollar machines, the surgical staff, they literally have to be powered up and ready to go the exact second you need them, whether you walk through those doors or not.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 2. The brutal cost to exist.
So, that guarantee of readiness, it comes with a massive hurdle. Before you ever earn a single dollar of revenue, before you drop off one package or treat one patient, the financial bleeding begins, and it is heavy. To run a legitimate courier operation, not just a guy in a van, but a robust 10-van fleet that can actually handle commercial contracts, you need serious upfront capital. You are looking at a bare minimum of $300,000 to $600,000 right out of the gate. That's just to exist. We're talking vehicles, thousands per van in commercial insurance, state licenses, and you haven't even paid a single driver yet.
Now watch how this builds when we scale that exact same concept up to hospitals. The industry rule of thumb here is absolutely staggering. It costs roughly $1 million per bed just to construct the building. Think about that. Not $1 million for the hospital, $1 million per bed. So a modest, say, 120-bed community hospital, you're dropping $120 million just for the concrete, the wiring, and the plumbing.
And keep in mind, for that $120 million, those rooms are totally empty. Let's look at the hidden cost of just one piece of medical gear, an MRI machine. The scanner itself runs between $1 to $3 million. But wait, it needs a highly specialized, magnetically shielded room, which tacks on another $300K to $1.6 million. Do the math, and you're spending $3 to $5 million on a single MRI suite that's just sitting there, burning cash, before it ever scans a single patient.
And you can't just buy the gear and flip the open side. Then come the regulatory roadblocks. Couriers need a motor carrier authority number, and if you mess that up, boom, a $10,000 fine per violation. Hospitals, they face something even crazier called a certificate of need. It's this grueling multi-year government process just to prove your community actually needs a new facility. These mandatory regulations act as massive barriers to entry that just drain your capital while you're legally forced to sit idle.
Let's move on to Section 3, the operating margin trap. Okay, so you've bled millions or hundreds of thousands just to exist. You finally open the doors. Welcome to the operating margin trap. This is the unyielding, everyday math of running these high fixed cost machines. Take a look at this. Notice the overwhelming dominance of one particular expense? Labor. In both of these industries, labor is your biggest, most immovable drain. It eats up roughly 60% of total operating costs. Whether it's drivers and dispatchers or nurses and surgeons, it doesn't matter. You have to pay your people for every single shift, completely regardless of how many packages actually ship or how many patients walk through the door that day.
And then you have these invisible drains eating away at your incredibly thin margin. Let's track a single failed delivery. A driver pulls up, no one's home, the package needs a signature. So what happens? It goes all the way back to the depot, gets scanned, stored overnight, and loaded up to be reattempted tomorrow. That invisible structural event, it costs the courier an average of $17.20. You're burning fuel and labor twice for absolutely zero extra revenue. Literally, one failed delivery can wipe out the profit of 2 or 3 successful ones just like that.
Hospitals face their own invisible drains, but they survive on a really fragile internal subsidy. See, emergency rooms legally cannot turn away patients, which means they routinely lose money treating folks who simply can't pay. So how do the doors stay open? It's all subsidized by highly profitable elective surgeries. Think scheduled hip replacements. And those strong margin diagnostic scans we talked about earlier. They quietly fund the money-losing ERs. It is a super delicate balancing act.
But let's say you perfectly balance that internal subsidy, or you map your courier routes flawlessly. You still have external threats lurking out there, completely out of your control. For a courier, maybe diesel fuel suddenly spikes 53%. You can't plan for that. For a hospital, it's a shift in the payer mix, meaning suddenly you have fewer patients with high-paying private insurance and way more relying on government programs like Medicaid, which reimburse at a tiny fraction of the cost.
So what happens next? Section 4, when the math breaks.
This right here is the tipping point. What actually happens when these rigid, high fixed cost structures slam headfirst into real-world volatility? Let's check out our 10-van courier operation. In a stellar year, they might pull in $700,000 in net profit. Amazing, right? But in a bad year? Let's say a major client drops their volume, fuel jumps, and one van needs a surprise $12,000 engine rebuilt. Just look at that drop. Net profit collapses to a mere $40,000. That is a terrifying $660,000 swing caused purely by a few bad external variables, all while their operating costs stayed virtually identical.
And here's the kicker. That exact same brutal volatility applies at the billion-dollar scale. A brilliantly run hospital in a good year might see a 7 to 8% profit margin. But if labor costs suddenly jump and that payer mix shifts the wrong way, that margin absolutely plummets to 1 or 2% or worse, an outright multi-million-dollar loss. The massive building, the staff, the MRI machines, they cost the exact same to run, but the profit just vanishes into thin air.
This unbending dynamic creates something known as the rural hospital trap. You might see a struggling rural hospital listed for a fraction of its construction cost and think, wow, what a steal. But it's actually a massive trap. Since 2010, over 180 rural hospitals have shut down. Why? Because your 24/7 fixed costs, the mandated nursing ratios, the electricity, the insane malpractice insurance, they do not shrink just because fewer patients showed up that month.
And if you think being a massive corporation protects you, think again. Scale doesn't save you from bad math. Take the Steward Healthcare collapse. In 2010, private equity bought 6 hospitals for $900 million. By 2016, they sold off the real estate and leased it back to free up cash. Fast forward to May 2024, Steward filed for bankruptcy, drowning in $9 billion in liabilities. They had locked themselves into $6.6 billion in inflexible, long-term leases. When margins got squeezed, they literally couldn't even pay vendors for critical medical supplies. Being huge didn't save them, it just made the crater much, much bigger.
Because big or small systemic macro shocks will absolutely wreck thin margins overnight. Remember 2021? The UK had a massive driver shortage that spiked courier salaries by 35%, all while operators were stuck in fixed-rate contracts. Or look at Amazon's delivery service partners. An algorithm completely dictates your metrics, but you hold all the real-world financial liability. And just like we saw with Steward Healthcare, when unpaid vendors show up to repossess your equipment, the ability to provide life-saving care stops right then and there.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the real business revealed.
So let's wrap this up. When you strip away the cardboard delivery boxes and the sterile operating rooms, what are these enterprises actually built on? What is the real product? Well, it becomes crystal clear. The business does not reward the operator who moves the most packages. It rewards structural discipline. For a courier, the physical van is not the asset. The real asset is the fuel surcharge clause you cleverly baked into your contract. It's the route density that keeps your drivers insanely efficient. It's the financial structure that protects you when the world turns upside down. And that exact same logic beautifully maps on to medicine. To quote the industry, the building is never really the asset. The patients, and who is actually paying for them, is the asset. A hospital's true value has nothing to do with the multi-million-dollar real estate it sits on or that fancy MRI suite. The true asset is its payer mix. It's the incredibly delicate balance of how that care is funded that actually keeps the giant machine alive. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on next time you're looking at a massive physical enterprise. If the real asset isn't the delivery van and it isn't the physical hospital infrastructure,
Are you actually buying a business, or are you just buying a massive fixed cost liability? Thanks so much for hanging out with me on this explainer. Keep questioning those margins, keep hunting for the true assets, and I'll catch you in the next one.